Okay, we're gonna continue with our all things data track. So let's get back on track. So we're starting at 11, have 30 minutes, and then 10 minutes time to switch speakers. Now we have Sam Hames, postdoctoral research fellow of School of Language and Culture of University of Queensland. He's going to talk about Stack Overflow analysis. It's being very much into in the tech world about Stack Overflow. The traffic apparently is dropping because of AI. So let's see what his talk is about. And I want to welcome him. So with you, Sam.
Hello. So I'm going to talk about a recent history of Python, because Python was launched in first Python release in 1991, I think, and Stack Overflow started in 2008. So obviously there's a big bunch of time I'm not going to touch on in this talk, so that's why I'm calling this a recent history. So the kind of opening question I have for you is put up your hand if you've used Stack Overflow before. Okay, I think that's pretty much everybody, which is about what I expected, and that's why I thought I really wanted to look at this particular topic, because I think Stack Overflow is a really interesting tool, community platform that everybody seems to use. In fact, their CEO talks about 100 million monthly visitors, top 50 of all websites, 50 billion times access in the last years. So that's the one hand. So if you've ever searched for a technical problem on Google or any other search engine, you've probably got a link to Stack Overflow at least once. And I imagine that's how many of you ended up using Stack Overflow. But the flip side of that is that Stack Overflow then occupies this really weird niche where it's a really popular site to visit, but the actual demographics of the users are highly skewed. Male, Western, particularly white, European, and younger. So those are from their 2022 demographics survey. By extension, presumably English speaking, but that's not questions they asked. And their demographics are so skewed, and they got so much bad press from their 2022 survey showing that 93% of their users were male, that they got rid of almost all of their demographic questions for 2023. So there's something going on there. I'm actually here today to talk about Python and looking at this as Stack Overflow, and I'm going to draw some limited inferences to the rest of the world. I'm not going to assume that Stack Overflow is all development, although I'll probably slip up at least once and make that connection. The other interesting part about it is that Stack Overflow data is open. All of the user-submitted content on Stack Overflow is licensed under one version of Creative Commons by attribution share alike. So that's important. And all of the Stack Exchange sites data, they actually have a real commitment to transparency in that they just release all of the data. You can go to archive.org, you can download it. So the question for me and kind of the motivation for this is, how do we actually make use of that data to tell us something interesting about the recent history of Python? Can we do something with this to show us something new? The first problem, if you actually go to look at the data, the single post.xml file that holds all the questions and answers and a few other things is 95 gigabytes of XML. So that's fun. And that's not even including the comments. That's not even, there's also the full history of posts, which is even bigger. And the other flip side of that is when I say post, one of the interesting things about Stack Exchange data is that their kind of unifying concept is posts, but that doesn't necessarily map to what you see on the screen. So this is the earliest question tagged Python that I found in the data set. It's about XML processing. For the purposes of this talk, I'm interested in two kinds of posts. There's a couple of others which I'm not interested in. This is a typical question on Stack Overflow. We've got, well, actually this is atypical because it doesn't actually ask a question. So we've got this is the first post in this particular grouping. It's the question that initiates everything. It's got a title, it's got a body, it's got some tags, it's by a particular person. If we scroll down, we see more answers. Each of these answers is another post. So when you see a page like this, which is a question and a bunch of answers, this is a grouping of posts that are glued together because we know they're an answer to a particular question. So the kind of starting point for me for dealing with all of this data is that we want to break this down into something more sensible. And the approach I've taken is to look at posts as units, and I'll do some breakdowns later differentiating between questions and answers. The other thing I've done is broken out the body of the questions and answers, the title of the question, and I've pulled out all of the words from all of them. I've also taken the extra step because it turns out code blocks are really hard to deal with in a text analytics fashion because there's so much stuff. There are so many people there are lots and lots of tracebacks and error messages and displays of random shell output with lots of, so you end up with, it's really hard to deal with the code blocks directly. So I've actually pulled them out and I haven't even looked at them for the purposes of this talk. Maybe I'll look at them later. So that's kind of how what the underlying data structure looks like. If we start breaking it down and looking at trends. So I just before this talk, sorry, it was in the introduction to this talk, there was a mention about traffic to Stack Overflow declining. I want to point out that you can draw no conclusions about it from this particular graph. This is just illustrative of the trends in questions and all posts over time to Stack Overflow. The reason I say you can't draw too many questions is that Stack Overflow is the biggest part of the Stack Exchange network, but there are a bunch of other, and have been continually starting new bunches of other sites. So there's like a Unix Stack Exchange, there's a system administrator Stack Exchange, there's Windows and academia and travel. So you've got to be careful interpreting a graph like this, looking at just one part of the network when there's all these other parts. And they seem to be making a very strategic choice to make targeted communities for different things. So yeah, the other takeaway from this is that that's a lot of posts. So we're talking about, at peak, 200,000 questions a month, which that's a lot. I mean, I can't read 200,000 questions. I can't do much with that if I'm going through it manually. I wanted to just to kind of assure you that there's lots of other stuff in Stack Overflow. It's not just Python. Python, if we take both the questions that the tags are assigned to and all of the answers to those questions as having that same tag, which isn't completely correct, but it's close enough for this. Python is the number 2 tag by number of posts, just behind JavaScript and just ahead of Java. Not a popularity contest. These are quantities, they don't have any meaning. I wouldn't take this to say that Python is the number 2 language and JavaScript is the number 1. Doesn't mean that. On Stack Overflow, numerically, Python is the second most tagged thing. When we look at just Python, I forgot the other one important part. This is shifting all over the place. So from now on, everything I'm going to give you is a relative proportion because it kind of cleans up. Otherwise, every graph is going to have this shape. I'm also going to chop the first and the last month off because they're not complete. So just about everything I've got from now on will be relative. So you don't just see this on a bunch of different graphs. If we just look at the Python tag, then that's where it becomes really interesting. So in the last few years, 7.5% of questions to Stack Overflow have been tagged with Python. 7.5%. So regardless of all of our discussion about the decline or not decline, or is Stack Overflow declining, is AI replacing it, Stack Overflow is still a really important place to the Python community. There are a lot of people asking questions there. There are a lot of people answering questions there. So regardless of all that other stuff and what the future may hold, it is important for that particular reason, keeping in mind all the things I just said about demographics earlier. So tags are nice, but they're actually really limited. Like Stack Overflow, I believe Stack Exchange only lets you add 5 tags, and they're intended more as how do we find people to answer this question, not as an analytically useful thing. It's not necessarily useful for finding out what's going on there. The other, we're in a data track. I'm sure you're all thinking of ways to how you'd tackle this particular thing, things you might do. And there's heaps of things. So you could cluster questions and answers together, see if there's any interesting groupings. You could, importantly, if you had some predetermined questions you wanted to answer, which I don't, you could take a supervised machine learning approach, or you could look at using large language models. You could look at topic modeling and LDA and those class of algorithms, or, and I'm going to mention this one because it doesn't get enough attention, you could also take a corpus linguist approach and you could start looking at big lists of words over time and see if there's anything interesting in there. Or you could do a keyword detection and find out that Stack Overflow uses a heap of technical language compared to some other reference corpus, which isn't super interesting to me. And because I'm an academic and this is partly both a research question and I'm interested in the methods and other things, the actual answer I took was to no, we'll do none of that. Let's start from scratch and do something else again. Because I'm actually aiming for a different audience necessarily than all of you, but I think you'll find it interesting anyway. So it's an open source package. It's open source and it's academic, so there's like double no guarantees of any kind, no warranties. If it breaks, sorry, not sorry, honestly. But it is all open there, you can have a look. This is also a follow-up, because I gave a talk in 2019 that you don't always need NumPy, and there is no NumPy in this. So the actual what I wanted to get away from, the actual approach and inspiration for this was what if topic models, but you could actually edit and interact and browse and drive through them. So it's as a kind of, how do we do something useful that isn't just, well, here's a probability distribution of words and topics, now what? So the actual solution they came up with is we take all of the words in all of the posts and we cluster them. So instead of clustering the documents, we're now clustering the words that occur in the documents. And it works better than I ever hoped. It's really weird to me every time I look at a new data set and it just works. So these are ordered. So these are the outputs of creating 1,024 clusters of words on all of the Stack Overflow posts. I did all of this on my laptop. Obviously, the top things are the things that are usually removed by all of the data science people, like stop words, punctuation. Punctuation is actually really important if you want to look at code, but I'll not belabor that point. So these are ordered by the number of documents that match. So this cluster 894 matches 58 million documents because it has common punctuation and common words. So it matches almost the entire data set, and it matches every document that has one of these words. As we go down, we start to get, you can see there's kind of a mixture of things. So some of these are just the words of language, like language is highly structured. We can't just choose whatever we like. We don't just throw out a bunch of keywords when we're talking to other people. As we go down in descending frequency, these clusters start to have more specific meaning in the context of programming. So we're already down to types at cluster 570. And if we go all the way to the end, you get clusters of a lot of clusters of Java errors and tracebacks, which is interesting. And some of this is partly driven by norms in that, particularly early on, not everything was wrapped in, like not all console output was wrapped in a code block. And I think it took a little while for some of those standard practices to kind of become enforceable or become norms. So if we actually, so let's go back. So the other kind of thing that I think this is important, so let's rearrange everything by similarity to the word working, and let's have a look at some of the documents that match that particular word. And we've sorted all of the clusters and all the words in those clusters by similarity to that word. So we see that working is a very generic word in that it's used in many different contexts. So we got Capistrano, Flask in Docker, compiling assembly files in CMake. So working is not necessarily a useful word if I want to look at Python, but we could do something like, Let's search for Pythonic in the post. That's even better. I just realized that's even better than I thought, in that it's saying, people often say comprehensions are Pythonic, which is already interesting, and that's probably a whole separate thing to the rest of what I'm going to talk about today. So that's the thing. You can have a look at it. The idea is that, so what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this is I'm going to talk about these clusters of words. I'm going to talk about the trends in these clusters of words over time. And I'm going to talk about a bit about, because I've also spent time reading documents that match these words as well. So it's not just I'm not just looking at the words and telling you what they mean. I'm looking at a sample of the underlying documents as well, without reading 58 million of them, because I haven't got time for that. So let's start with whether this works or not. So sometimes it's really, really obvious what you're looking at. When you have cryptocurrency people using really specific language and really specific keywords around technologies and approaches, you get the rise and fall again of various cryptocurrency related projects. So in blue is, I'd call it cryptocurrencies because it's wallets and Ethereum and wallets and Ethereum and Bitcoin. Green is NFTs somehow, and so on. So this one makes sense. Sometimes, though, it gets a bit harder. So if I picked out these three particular things, which I guess the face reading is we've got the rise and gradual decline of Angular compared to React, with the caveat that React has pulled in a few. So I guess because it's just a numerical model, native and component have kind of been glommed into React because there's so many people talking about React Native and components in React that what is actually a general keyword has been absorbed into the framework. And also, depending on what you want to do, you might say that HTML, JavaScript, CSS, jQuery is too general, that's too many things. And if you do say that, I completely agree with you. And what I would tell you, so we could, for example, if we just wanted to separate JavaScript and jQuery as synonymous with JavaScript during the early part of Stack Overflow, we can just pull it out on its own, and then we can use that as its own little thing separate to everything else. And it's all dynamically updated. So if we then wanted to look at this separately to everything else, we get this. So, lots of questions about clicking buttons and getting that to work in HTML or in JavaScript. So the clusters are useful, but they don't absolve you from the work of reading and making changes and making choices and interpretation. So let's look at Python. Let's warm up with a nice easy one. So everything I'm going to show you now is everything is a subset related to everything that's been tagged with Python. So I'm using the Python tag as a approximate filter down to is this about Python or not. And I say approximate because I've read heaps of ones where the person who asked the question tags it Python, and then somebody gives an answer in a different language, which maybe is not what the person asking the question wanted, or maybe not. So we'll start off with a nice obvious one. We've got all the questions related to asking questions and the important punctuation mark, the question mark, which indicates that you are asking a question. Almost every question tagged Python has those, and that's what you'd expect. And also, more importantly, lots of the answers don't have that. So the answerers of questions are not themselves asking that many questions. They might be using some of these other keywords, these other words, because they're quite general. But so I guess that makes sense. And the trend is fairly flat over time. I'm going to say trend, but it's more the vibes. This is all vibes. I'm more a qualitative person than a quantitative, despite the computational stuff. Sorry, every time I see guys in this, I just sigh a bit because, again, back to the demographics and whole separate problem. Interestingly, I think the exclamation mark in questions has a more positive emotional affect. So thanks in advance for your help. It's more positive or more, it's not necessarily a negative thing like it might be in some other contexts. So lots of people have exclamation marks and thanks and welcomes and nice positive things. Except in the answers, people don't bother with that in the answers. I think answers because I think it's a smaller group of people giving more answers, and they tend to be more focused and direct when giving an answer. Like I said, vibes. The other one that's really interesting to me is, and this to me also highlights one of the challenges with Stack Overflow and going from Stack Overflow to the rest of programming, is that I think Stack Overflow is very transactional or tactical. A lot of questions are there because people have an immediate problem that they're trying to solve. So, and in fact, the site actively discourages more general questions like relating to bigger scale topics like architectural approaches, testing approaches, and things like that. So a lot of the questions are, I'm getting this error. What do I do? What am I doing wrong? Can you help me fix this? So you've got to be really careful going from Stack Overflow to the broader practice of programming, because I'm sure many of you would agree with me in saying that programming is more than just writing a bit of code and debugging an immediate problem. There's a lot of other things we do besides that. Now, I'll give you one other warning. The hardest part about this talk was to figure out what to talk about, because I have 1,024 clusters, I have 1,024 trends over time, and I have intersection with whatever I want in the data set. So it was really hard just to focus down. And if you do want like some really overwhelming grids of graphs relating to trends, I've got heaps of them for you. And I've tried to select a few interesting things more based on vibes and what you're interested in, and the fact that this is a Python community rather than anything else. So I'm going through a lot of things. So I spent a lot of time looking at graphs. I spent a lot of time reading questions. And I noticed there are a couple of recurring topics that I would call fundamental programming topics, and they keep coming up both in questions and answers. And they have a few, the reason I'd call them fundamentals is that they're directly recognizable topics, but they're used in so many different contexts that you can't just say, well, obviously they're always talking about this problem. It's like, no, this is a fundamental thing. When you talk to a programmer or an experienced programmer, they know this, they assume you know this, they're going to answer as if you know this. And the first one, I will call the strings and textual types, which, again, has been there from the beginning. So 22% of the questions, even at the beginning when Python was not a big part of Stack Overflow, had things related to this and a few more keywords. So strings and textual types are a really fundamental thing. If you can't work with them, or you're confused by them, or you're having trouble with them, it's going to be hard to do it. And there were so many fun and interesting ways people actually referred to strings. Like, so the CSV is there because CSVs are a textual data format. And there's so many questions about, I need to go from this to this. How do I do this conversion? How do I change this format? How do I do this stuff? It's a really fundamental thing. If you don't know this, you're going to struggle. I should also mention this is not an exhaustive list. There's a lot of fundamental things that you can probably think of that I won't mention here today. I just thought these particular ones look nice. I don't think I need to, files and file systems. Really hard to do anything if you don't know how your file system works, or you're struggling to understand how a path works, or where your file is, or what's my working directory. Root is a keyword. It's a fundamental part. And I just realized it's like everything in programming, it's also overloaded because it means different things if you're talking about the root of a file system or a root user in a Unix system. So that's actually one of the challenges beginners face, is they don't even know the right words to use, or they can't differentiate between the different meanings of the same word because we all use the same words. Variables. Hard to program if you don't have any variables. It's one of the nice things about Python is how much you can do just in terms of assignment and scope and function scope and all those other things. Again, iteration. With a bonus infinite loop keyword where people are getting stuck because they're in a while loop that never exits. Arguments to functions. Some people get confused by keyword arguments or how to use keyword arguments or what's a callable anyway. Or I supplied, this is what I supplied, why isn't it working? Built-in types, super important. Hard to work in Python without a dictionary. Dates and times. Please don't ask me about time zones, I don't know. But this one and the next one are interesting together. And so I'll tell you my theory now why there is a decline in discussion of classes. And I think that's because Python is shifting, so Python is in the position it is today, I think, and this is where I'm extrapolating from Stack Overflow to everything else. I'm looking at these trends and what I know as a professional software developer. Probably the most notable part is that Python, along with everything else it has historically been, Python is a language for data science. It has an entire data science ecosystem built on top of it. So we see a real rise in prominence, even as the volume and proportion of Python questions are going up on Stack Overflow. The volume and proportion of scientific computing and data science related computing stuff is going up at the same time. So I think there's a feedback loop there. And I think part of the reason we're talking less about classes is more because in the data science world, you tend to spend less time constructing systems of objects. You have a data with a particular schema, and that's your model of the world. So you don't have an object, you have a schema. I did say vibes, I'll say it again. This is the one that surprised me the most, because I was not expecting this particular volume. So 15% of questions in the last few years tagged with Python and the answers to those questions, 15% of them touch on pandas and data frames. So this is the data science in Python community growing over time. And there's a general consensus that pandas and data frames is a useful construct and everybody's using them and there's a lot of confusion about them. I've got specific confusion about a few different aspects of pandas, which I'm not going to talk about today. But we've also got machine learning in general. I don't know why there's a dip there. If somebody's got some ideas, I'd love to hear them. I got nothing. I also don't know why there's a peak there, but maybe I can blame large language models for that, or thank them. Not sure which way around. We've also got the rise in deep learning. So 5% of questions about TensorFlow and Keras and Tensor and PyTorch and their various things. That's surprising to me. That's cool. And lastly, plotting and visualization. Everybody wants to make plots because plots are cool. Visualization's a really important part of practice. The other one, which is, because there's a Django conference right now, again, this is proportion. And remember at the beginning, Stack Overflow was only 1 or 2% of questions about Python. I want you to compare this to the rise and fall of Angular I showed you there. And to me, this is Django as in it for the long haul. Still relevant, still important, still lots of people asking questions, and so on. And in the interest of time, I'm going to skip the last one. Second last one, and just mention notebooks are cool. More and more people are using them. So, to summarize, In the context of Stack Overflow, I'd say that the relative growth in Python questions on Stack Overflow is directly tied to Python as a language for data science. There's a lot of language fundamentals that haven't changed, even if you're using the things in the Python data science stack on top of that. But there's also lots of really exciting things happening in the Python ecosystem that build on top of Python as a language. So Python as data science is not just about Python the language, it's about all of the things built on top of it. And I'm going to leave you with the metaphor, the nice philosophical summary Python is, and just leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Sam. Very good presentation. We would love to have more time, but all good. So we're not taking questions. So is there any questions interesting? Okay, good. So we'll have 10 minutes to change rooms, and we'll continue here at what time is 10:30 or 11:40. The next talk about 3D visualization. Okay, Stan. Thank you very much.